I think I am. I think I'm online now. Oh, hey, James, how are you doing? Is there a link between fibromyalgia and polymyalgia? Yeah, I mean, when if you're around, happy to talk about that. Hey, Jillian, welcome. Good morning. Hey, Cheryl. Hi, Rebecca. Hi. How are you guys doing? I'm not doing too well, but anyway, we'll see how we get on. Hey, Cheryl. How is it hanging? Good morning. It must be very early for you, Rebecca. Bless you. It must be really, really early. Thank you for being here. Cheers. It's yeah, what North Carolina. So is that ET standard? Oh my God. Do I even dare asking why you're awake this early? I suspect either you're having a very good day and felt full of energy early, or maybe sleep wasn't your friend. Well, whichever the case, thank you for being here. Yeah, no, I can relate. I've not had a very good night's sleep. It's probably written all over my face. I've not have a very good anything, to be fair. No. Um. So I'm not like awful, but if I had to rate myself 1 out of 10 today, I would say I'm at about a 6, more or less. Hi, Evelyn. How are you doing? Welcome. Good morning. How are you? Yeah, I'm at about a 6. I have this. My face just seems to be on fire. Yeah, lots of sinus problems, lots of fatigue problems. James, if you're still in the chat, I will address your question as soon as we get started. By the way, I'm not ignoring you. I just think it's a very good question, and everyone else should hear the answer. Well, yeah, to be fair, it's I'll talk about it a bit more, but it's because of the stupid weather changes we've been having in the UK. Oh, cool, you're still there. Awesome, James. Yeah, no worries. I will address it because well, I actually know a fair bit about it because my dad has been in a very similar situation, so it's good. But yeah, it's all down, particularly this week, down to the weather, which, well, it's like that. Hey, Isabella. Hello. Good morning, or well, good day, depending where you are. How are you? We're feeling a bit so in here, but thank you for joining me. We got about 1 minute and 16 seconds to go, so just getting ready. It's I can feel it's gonna be a long day. No, well, I hope you guys are having a good one, though. It's the weekend nearly. I'm working today and tomorrow. I have Sunday off, thankfully, so I can do some rest, and I have 2 days off in a row next week, which is good, because rest is very much needed and very undervalued. So if there is any words of wisdom I can pass on today, is prioritize your rest. Hey, Jenny, how are you? Welcome. Good day. Good morning. How are you? Hopefully good. That should be nice. But yeah, we have 30 seconds to go. So when the timer goes green, I'll start talking about this stuff, and I'll be answering James's question at the top of the chat, in case you guys haven't seen it, about the relationship between fibromyalgia and polymyalgia. Hey, Chris. Hello, Chris. Welcome. How are you? And I think we're about to go green in a second. Thanks, Cheryl. Thank you. And we're live. Okay, let's try and do this. So, hello everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lily. I normally run tours around the UK or from home sessions of history because I'm a tour guide and historian. But today I am going to talk to you about something that is part of my daily struggle, which is the chronic illness I live with, which is fibromyalgia, which is not having a good day with me today. And I'll explain, before I move on, I'll explain why I'm doing this, because I think that is important. So I officially started doing this on heygo on the 12th of May, which is Fibromyalgia Awareness Day, just to raise awareness and to raise some funds for the charity that I support here in the UK, which is Fibromyalgia Action UK, which are really, really good. But I decided to keep this going regularly on a monthly basis because I realized a lot of people suffered from fibromyalgia here on heygo, or other chronic illnesses that may be similar. And it just created a nice space for people to just talk and share their feelings and their concerns, which I think is very necessary, particularly in the world we have right now. And just because, doesn't matter if it's Awareness Day or not, these conversations should be had all the time. So I decided I was going to keep this rolling. Hey, Ronnie, how are you? Welcome. Now, today I don't feel very well, and I'll explain in a moment what's assailing me in terms of fibromyalgia. But first, for those of you who may not know, I'll give you some basic details about fibro, and then I'll get into the thick of it, which is the different symptoms. I'll answer James's question, and any questions you guys may have, or anything you want to throw out there, please put it in the chat. This is very much, I see this very much as an open conversation for everyone, so please don't be shy. Right, well, for those of you who may not know, fibromyalgia is a chronic illness, so that means it has no cure, and it stays with you for life. But it's not degenerative in the sense that it doesn't necessarily get worse as time goes on. Hey, Lorna, welcome. We're just getting started. Hope you're doing good. This is my first tour with heygo. Well, Chris, you are definitely coming in a very interesting tour. I normally would be around showing you cool things, but well, this is a different session, but I hope it helps you anyway. So even though fibromyalgia is not degenerative, because we get older, of course, our bodies suffer and they get worse. And that's where we can see some deterioration. It doesn't come from the fact that the illness makes you deteriorate, but because the illness is tied in to your mind and your body. As you deteriorate, it deteriorates with you. So that's the thing with fibromyalgia. It's not something that's going to get worse through time out of its own right. It's just something that just, is part of your body. Now, what is fibromyalgia exactly? Well, there is still a little bit of debate in the medical community. Fibromyalgia is, in fact, not a very well understood illness as of yet. But it is, technically speaking, a neurological condition. I'm here because my daughter suffers from this. Oh, Chris, I sympathize with your daughter so much because this is very much how I found things on my end. So I really hope this will be of use. And I always say this, whether it's questions or whatever, you're always very, very welcome to reach out. I'm always very happy to talk about this on screen, off screen. It's something that is very much necessary. But as I was saying, it's something that the medical community is still trying to figure out. But as of now, fibromyalgia is still understood as a neurological condition. It's not a musculoskeletal condition. It does affect our muscles, unfortunately. It's not an autoimmune disease, but although it's ruled out as an autoimmune disease, there may be some connections that make it more prone to be developed in people with autoimmune illnesses. And part of fibromyalgia is also genetic. So, for example, in my case, my granny has fibromyalgia, my uncle has fibromyalgia, and my dad, we think he has it too, he just doesn't have it diagnosed. Now, the way fibromyalgia works is the following. Essentially, being a neurological illness, it all starts in your brain. Hey Jay, welcome, how are you? Thanks for joining me here in my little talk about fibro. So what happens to people like me with fibromyalgia is that our neurons are not wired properly. Like, you need to think that the brain is essentially like a huge computer, like a big electrical appliance. And if the cables are not, operating properly, things just don't go well. And that's essentially what fibromyalgia means. Now, the reason why we associate it with pain and fatigue, which are the two most common symptoms that this illness creates, is because that malfunction in the brain causes those symptoms. So the illness is not the pain and the fatigue, those are the symptoms of what's actually happening, which is the fact that our brain doesn't process information properly, and therefore it just sends wrong things all over us that creates a very, very confused state of being and in general of functioning. Hey Don, thank you for joining me. Hope you're doing good. So that's what fibromyalgia is. Now, the reason why it translates into pain and fatigue is because of how our neurons work. So pain is actually a message, okay? In our body, it's a neurotransmitter. So, in the same way that when you're hungry, that's a message that your brain is sending you to say, hey, you need to bring food inside of you, or when you're thirsty. Pain is the same thing. Pain is a message that your brain fires through your neurons and your nerves to protect you from danger, normally from physical danger. That's the reason why, when you're about to hit yourself or you hit yourself with something, you just feel that little reaction that is just to tell you, that's gonna harm you, stay away from that. That's why we have pain as a reaction and as a message. Otherwise, we will be doing all sorts of things to us that, will jeopardize our well-being. But pain itself is actually a message. And as a message, it can be transmitted in a way that is not necessarily correct. So for people with fibromyalgia, our sensation of pain is very different from a normal brain because we don't always understand that message properly. So for example, this thing that I've been doing on a bad day, even though, my nails are quite sharp, but on a bad day, because the information message of pain may have been sent wrong by my brain, this may feel like I'm literally drilling through my hand, and I have no control over that. Or some days, it may just feel like barely a scratch. So it's not just the fact that we perceive pain in a heightened level, it's also the fact that sometimes we don't perceive it properly anyway, and that can cause problems as well, because we may hurt ourselves. And later on, when our brain properly understands that information, it will send us on a spiral, which is really dangerous. So that's actually how fibromyalgia works, and the reason why it affects different parts of your body, because at the end of the day, everything is controlled with this one. Now, it's not just the pain, it's also the fatigue. Of course, when your brain cannot process information properly, you get tired very, very rapidly. And for people with fibromyalgia, it's not just physical fatigue. The physical fatigue is quite severe, and it can vary, again, from person to person, but it's also emotional fatigue. Processing emotions, yours or of other people, takes a lot of brain energy to comprehend what those human beings are going through or what you're going through. And the same with mental fatigue, reading things, listening to things, processing any kind of information requires actually a lot of energy. That's the reason why when we eat, the vast majority of the energy food that we eat, such as carbohydrates, sugars, fats, etc., are actually consumed by the brain because it's constantly processing. Hey Kim, welcome. How are you? Welcome to our talk on fibromyalgia. So that's what the illness is. And that's roughly how it goes through. Now, there is a bunch of other random symptoms that I'll talk to you about in a moment as well. But just so you can get things on a better understanding platform, 1 in 10 women in the UK are suspected of suffering from fibromyalgia. Sorry, 1 in 20 women in the UK, not in 10. 1 in 20 women in the UK are suspected from suffering from fibromyalgia. That's a lot of women. And I use women, and the medical community use women as a measure of determining how many people are ill in this community, not because it happens more on women than in men, but because it's actually a lot harder to diagnose fibromyalgia in men than it is in women. So actually there is a lot of men out there who suffer with this illness and don't even have a diagnosis, like in the case of my dad, because our biological markers as women and as men are slightly different. And when you're doing tests and whatnot in men, they can just read as other things. Now, that's a lot of people. I think we can all agree. It affects a big chunk of the human population. But the problem is because it's such a strange illness, it's quite unpredictable, and it doesn't have a lot of visual symptoms unless you're having a really bad day. It's hard for people to understand it. It's hard for people to study it. And the way that fibromyalgia affects me doesn't have to be the same way that fibromyalgia affects somewhere else. We may have similar symptoms, But at the end of the day, my brain is different, my body is different, and the way it's gonna have an impact on me is never gonna be like for like than it will be on another person. So it's very difficult to actually pinpoint it. And that's the reason why a lot of people in the medical community now think that fibromyalgia may be similar to like autism and things like that, because it may be on a spectrum. You may have mild fibromyalgia, you may have severe fibromyalgia, or you may have all of the stages, and it may just depend on your cycle, which makes it really hard to control. You can get medication for fibromyalgia, but it only works in about 50% of patients, and it's very much depending on how you react to these medicines. There is no specific treatment, like no drug that has been specifically created for fibromyalgia. The vast majority of us, if we end up with this type of medication, they tend to be antidepressants, which don't actually necessarily treat the fibromyalgia. They just try to put order in the brain chemistry. Or they tend to be medicines to control the pain and the fatigue, whether it's ordinary painkillers or opiates. That's normally the type of medicine that people with fibromyalgia end up with, if you're lucky and if it works on you. None of the medicines that they've tried on me actually worked. They made me quite a lot worse, to the point that I had such horrible reactions to them that not having any medicine at all was better than being on medicine. So in my case, and unfortunately in the case of many people, it's an illness that you have to manage yourself by making lifestyle changes. And that's really hard, because it essentially means that I have to micromanage every single minute of my life, which is not a very pleasant thing to do. But if it's what is gotta be done, is what is gotta be done. I have no choice. But it literally means you have to evaluate everything, from the way you think, from the way you move, from the way you do things, the way you eat, absolutely everything. So that's the measures in that sense. How does it get diagnosed? Well, the other reason why it's very hard to understand fibromyalgia is because there is no specific test you can get done to tick the boxes and say, hey, you have fibromyalgia. It's a process of elimination, actually. So what normally happens is that depending on your symptoms, depending on which ones of those symptoms manifest more clearly, you will be tested for other things. One of the most common things that they will test you for, first and foremost, when you have fibro, is arthritis, any of the arthritis. They may test you for other musculoskeletal problems. They may test you for other neurological problems or autoimmune conditions. Now, there is loads of those. So normally the process of diagnosis takes years, and I generally mean years, unless you're very, very lucky and you have a doctor that actually has dealt with the illness before and that can sort of spot the symptoms clearly. It's very frustrating, because during that diagnosis process, you just don't know what's wrong with you. And a lot of the time we make decisions that we think are for our benefit that aren't necessarily so, because we just don't know what's wrong with us. Hey, Polly, welcome. How are you? So just using myself as an example of how long it took me to be diagnosed, I've been suffering, I'm 31 now. I've been suffering with fibromyalgia since I was 17, when I was doing my A-levels, but I didn't get a diagnosis until I was 25. So that was, the late of my teens and all of my early 20s, which is the reason why I sympathize so much with your daughter, Chris, that where I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just knew I wasn't well, but I didn't know. So it created a lot of frustration, and particularly if that process gets prolonged for whatever reason, a lot of people end up suffering quite severely. And their mental health can deteriorate, because the frustration accumulates, and it's just hard. It's hard to handle it. And the thing is, even when you have a diagnosis, it's not like you have a recipe to fix your illness. You have to figure a lot of things out. And even though I've been working on this for 6 years, pretty much nonstop, I don't have all the answers. Everything that I know is from experimenting on myself. I literally treat myself as a guinea pig. And read a lot and inform myself and listen to the doctors and pay a lot of attention and just experiment, which is actually really time consuming, is very draining, and it takes a lot of guts. which, is not something anyone should ever have to do. As many of you know, I do have a PhD. I actually went through this process of diagnosis and everything else while I was studying my PhD. And I think I'm just lucky that I have a very sort of analytical and structured mind that actually sort of forced me to just, prove my own thesis on me. But it's not a pleasant thing to do, and not something I wish upon anyone. You end up having some very, very dark moments, and it's not fun. So that's what fibromyalgia is, more or less, in a nutshell. Now, I will address a few things, starting, for example, with the question James had earlier. Now, for those of you who may have come late to the chat or haven't scrolled up, James asked if there is actually any relationship between fibromyalgia and polymyalgia. Well, yes, there is. The vast majority of the time, people who are diagnosed with polymyalgia are people who have either fibromyalgia or another type of autoimmune or neurological condition, but the doctors cannot pinpoint exactly what the issue is, because the factors that they use to discard the diagnosis and attribute it to fibromyalgia, maybe they haven't cleared out yet. Now, what polymyalgia literally means is algia comes from the Greek word of pain, which is obviously one of the main symptoms of fibro, and poly means multiple. So literally what they are calling that illness is multiple points of pain. I mean, no, really? I hadn't noticed. While fibromyalgia normally specifically refers to the pain that we feel in our fibers, mostly the tendons, the muscles, etc., etc. So again, it's not really a name that refers or diagnoses what's actually the problem, which is the brain malfunction. It's a name that is attributed to the symptoms. And because of that, because a lot of doctors only look at the symptoms rather than at the root causes, a lot of people end up with a generic diagnosis of polymyalgia, which isn't actually real or isn't actually proper, because it may be a further underlying condition such as fibro or a rare type of arthritis or multiple sclerosis, ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, etc., etc. That's, for example, the situation, James, that my dad is at. My dad has been a random amounts of polymyalgia since he was in his early 20s. Now, because the tests that they've been doing to my dad to check what the root cause of that, algias could be, haven't come out clear with a solution that would allow the doctors to see it, crystal clear. They just have carried on calling this polymyalgias and treating the muscular pain, even though the muscular pain is just, a side effect of it. So there is a very strong relationship in that sense that, they come literally together. Whether polymyalgia is always fibromyalgia is hard for us to ascertain. Like I said, there could be many other root causes. But if there is one thing I can say is that the vast majority of the time, and just because these illnesses tend to behave in a similar way, a lot of the things that we find that work for people with fibromyalgia proper tend to help people with polymyalgia as well, at least to control the symptoms and at least to improve our quality of life. So I hope that makes some sense, James, and I hope at least from that perspective something can work out, in that perspective and help move things along. Now, today I actually wanted to talk about some lesser known symptoms of fibromyalgia that perhaps may help you guys, understand whether you're going through this or someone else, is going through this, and the impact that these things can have in our life and our bodies. Hey, Jamie, welcome, and thank you so much for joining my talk on fibromyalgia. Well, I want to talk to you about one of the things I'm mostly feeling today. I mean, I'm sure you can see it all over my face. I'm not doing great today. Not great is an understatement. So in case you didn't know, in the UK, we've been going through some very strange weather. We've had a heat wave. Now we're having some rain and the weather is sort of cooling down, but it's clammy and whatnot. Now, this may sound really strange, but people with fibromyalgia and some other chronic illnesses, such as certain type of arthritis, we are actually very susceptible to drastic changes in weather and drastic changes in temperature. And you'll think, well, that's strange. Well, it is, but it isn't if you realize that our problem is processing messages, processing information. The weather is just another information factor in our life, and it controls a lot of this, think that if you're cold, coldness is a message, is something that has an impact in your actual body. So your immediate brain reaction is to try to find things to keep you warm. Now, if I don't understand that message properly, sometimes I'm almost in the border of becoming hypothermic because I don't know I'm actually that cold. It's the same with the heat, because I don't understand how badly the heat is affecting me, or my brain cannot process actually how hot it is. I may not be able to cool down in time, etc., etc. So when these drastic changes in weather happen, I just feel like rubbish. I kind of feel like a low running flu all the time, when you keep on going from one to another. That's literally how it feels when the weather is like this, and it really throws me off. Now, because the atmospheric pressure keeps on changing, atmospheric pressure does again have an impact on our bodies. We just don't notice it most of the time. I feel it though. I feel that suddenly my muscles are more tense or less tense, and that at the same time generates a state of not feeling great that is sincerely quite disgusting and that you can't really treat, because it doesn't matter if you take painkillers, that's not gonna make the weather go away. It's not gonna make it change. It is quite irritating. So that's the reason why I'm sort of feeling ugh, because the weather is ugh. And I can normally tell, because of that, in a way, it's kind of cool, because I can normally tell when something is gonna change in terms of the weather, but it's a curse, because then I know I'm just gonna suffer from it. Another thing that happens a lot with this weather, and that most people with fibromyalgia have, is essentially a perpetual inflammation of our sinuses. It's kind of like, imagine having sinusitis every single day of your life, but you don't actually have mucus or any actual bacteria, producing that inflammation. It's just your own brain making this area inflamed. So when I rinse my nose or have some phlegm, it's just clear. It's literally just irritation. So that's the reason why if you come on tour with me, guys, you may have noticed I'm always a little bit sniffly or things like that. That's the reason why. It's not that I'm constantly, having a cold, but my sinuses do feel that way. Oh, I'm just gonna quickly catch up with the chat. Thank you so much, Polly. I do agree with Polly, Chris, but then again, I'm biased. I am in here. Thank you so much for the follow, guys. I facilitate for a men's mental health charity. Oh, wow, that's amazing, Chris. That's, really important. And I particularly find as well that men with fibromyalgia and with chronic illnesses have a lot less support than women. And I'm not suggesting that there may be reasons beyond our personal circumstances than that, but I generally think that a lot of the time our gender standards make it hard for men to talk about these things particularly. I have a few of my friends, like I said, have fibromyalgia, and they are male, and they've been brought up in a world where you just can't talk about those stuff, or people will just tell you to like man up and deal with the pain, and it's like, yeah, that's totally the right thing to do, which is really hard, and it's really dangerous, and it actually ends up having a really big mental toll on you. Jamie, the weather affects me terribly too. Isn't it? It genuinely is. And this is something that I hope. Oh, hey, Bull, I hadn't seen you coming in, but thank you so much for joining. This is something that I really want to, I always emphasize and I try to explain, because it's really hard. Because our illness is a chronic illness, and not just mine, but many others out there. It's really hard to actually get people to understand what we're going through, because not 2 days may be the same. I felt absolutely fine yesterday. You wouldn't think I had a chronic illness yesterday. I just looked perfectly normal, and today I look run down. It also creates a different type of complications, which is something that unfortunately is very common in both the mental health and the chronic illness community, which is the fact that people don't believe you. They don't believe that you're ill, or they think that you may be exaggerating, or that you're putting it up. And at the same time, that has, a social toll on you. It has a mental health toll on you. It makes you feel very isolated. It makes you feel like you don't want to, have a connection with people, because they're constantly judging you. And let's face it, we have already enough on our plates just trying to function. I don't need anyone else's judgment on it. But it is genuinely really hard. And one thing that I always ask of people is, if you genuinely know someone else that may have some form of problem like this, or generally any problems in their life, just have a little bit of empathy. You don't know what they may be going through, even though they may be trying to explain this to you. That's just what their words are saying to you. You are never going to be able to feel what they feel. So just, give them a break, essentially. So Arl will be something I will push. That's great. I'm so glad, Chris. Thank you for that. Hey Robert, thank you so much for joining. Sorry, I'm just catching up with the chat. Exactly, part of the charity work is getting men to talk. Yeah, it generally is very hard to get those situations going. I'm lucky that I learned a lot of this from my dad, who happens to have several chronic illnesses, and he's always been very open about it. But when people don't take you seriously, particularly when you have all of those added pressures, it generally is very hard. Don, I find that the weather also affects me. I was diagnosed in 2005 and it's progressively worsened. I mean, I I know that this sounds like stereotypical, but climate change is a thing, and it actually affects our health, not just because of the direct impact it has on the environment, but there is actually a lot of our general health and well-being that is dependent on our environment being stable. Our environment becoming less and less stable, it generally will make us feel worse. And I agree with you, Don, particularly in seasonal changes. The worst one for me is spring, because at least in the UK, spring can be very, very volatile. You can go from wet to dry to cold to snow and then sunshine in one day. So going through all of those changes and processing all of that information is just too overwhelming. So spring is one of the worst times for me because of that. There seems to be a lack of medical research into this as well. 100%, Ronnie. Actually, I'll get to that in a second. But how does weather affect your fibromyalgia? So just briefly, I've touched on this, but just briefly, because different changes in weather, when the weather does drastic changes, not like normal weather, but when the weather goes drastic, like I don't know where you live, Bull, but here in the UK we've had this very crazy heat wave. Now we are again at a normal temperature, but obviously it's raining and it's a lot more damp than it was previously. Those kind of sudden peaks, they are hard for me to process. These these changes, and adapting to those very quick changes are hard for me to process, because as the neurological condition struggles with processing this information, I don't always understand, or I don't always catch on to that very quickly. I, for example, always have to be very prepared. Like, I hate having to rely on a weather app to know what's going to happen on my daily life. But I know, for example, that if I go out on tour, like when I'm normally touring with you guys out, I know that if I don't check the weather for the time that I'm going to be out and I don't prepare for it, I can put myself in serious danger. That's the reason why I always carry a jacket on my backpack, regardless of the weather, because if suddenly it starts blowing wind and I don't do something about it quick enough, by the time I get back home, I may be so cold that it may take me 2 hours to warm up. And I'm not exaggerating. So, for example, if it takes me 2 hours to warm up and my body is tensing during those 2 hours because of the cold, I know I'm going to end up with quite severe muscular pain, which then is going to cause fatigue, which then is going to cause me feeling generally not very well. That's, for example, one way. And I don't normally deal well with the heat in general. Just I have low blood pressure in general. But extreme heat with fibromyalgia, I mean, and in general, when it's very hot out there, everyone slows down, right? I'm sure you all can relate to this. If it's really hot out there, you just need to take a breather and you just need to treat yourself differently. Well, when you have fibromyalgia, it's even worse, because by the time you realize you need to slow down, you may be doing something else that is so time consuming or so energy consuming that you've overburned the amount of stuff you could do, and then you're just trying to compensate all the time. So it's not just the fact that you need to regulate your internal and external temperature. It's literally like, my thermostat doesn't work. Like, imagine I am a heating unit and my thermostat doesn't work. and I require someone to be tinkering on it 24/7. That's essentially what fibromyalgia does to my body in that sense. It's honestly just very draining because I just simply don't know. And it's really, really hard. But in the same way that that's with temperature, it can be with 1,000 other things. It's getting the right amount of rest, the right balance between how much I work or how much I don't work. What do I eat? When do I eat it? Did I have uh, too much of a rest? Because you can have too much of a rest. Did I not have enough of a rest? Was my sleep good? Was it not good? Did I watch too much TV? Did I? It's literally that. Is trying to find those parameters amongst which to move securely and safely, and it's really hard because essentially all of the indicators that life puts around us to tell us, what those parameters are, for me are always hazy. That's the reason why it's always, always so hazy. I hope that helps understand how that works, Bull. Lily, I've been listening. Oh, thank you so much, Chris. I'm so happy that this has helped. Well, no, thank you. I mean, in a way, like I don't want this to sound cliche, but in a way, it's different when I explain things when I'm having a good day and when I'm having a bad day. My reflection process may be altered by the way I feel. So I never shy away from trying to do the talk, whether I'm feeling good or whether I'm feeling bad, because I hope there is something useful that's going to come out of it no matter what, if that makes sense. Especially in the winter when I wake up, it is, yeah, that's Dawn. I completely relate to that. I do actually have to sleep in the winter in a way that I know I'm gonna get too warm during the night just so I can function in the morning, because otherwise I just know I will be unable to, or it will take me a really long time to start up. It's literally like, when you have a car and it's just not working, it's literally the same for me. In general, that's the reason why I'm not a morning person. I don't think I know a single person with chronic illness that is a morning person, to be fair. If you are, then I'm very, very jealous of you. But mornings can be hard because, it's that moment between going from a sleepy state to being fully aware. It's essentially our brain starting up again. And some days it takes 5 minutes, some days it takes me hours. And it's very challenging because I don't know how I'm going to wake up. I don't know if tomorrow is going to be an easy start day or a bad start day. And that can affect my productivity. It can affect, my workload. It can affect everything else. So sometimes we need to take preventive measures to actually make our life easier. And in fact, half of my time, I'm not doing things to help me now, like in the present. Half of the time I'm doing things to help me 5 minutes in the future, 5 hours in the future, 5 days in the future. And that's honestly the only way you can live life sustainably if you have a chronic illness, is constant prevention, which again just takes so much effort and commitment. It's really, really, really hard. And don't worry, Chris, it's not an issue. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly, I always use the thermostat reference, Don, because I think it's fairly easy to understand once you have that reference there. I thank you, Ronnie. I think it's whether it's fibromyalgia or something else, at the end of the day, we are all going through stuff. One of the things that I was going to say about research, based on what you were saying, Ronnie, is that actually because of COVID, there has been a lot more research put into this, and you'll think that seems peculiar. Well, I don't know if any of you guys have had COVID, but a lot of people who had COVID now have long COVID. Some of the side effects have stayed in their body. Well, a lot of those side effects are very, very similar to having fibromyalgia, particularly in terms of the chronic fatigue, because I think there is a general misunderstanding as to what chronic fatigue is. It's not just being tired. It's the reference I normally use is, we all have smartphones, right, or tablets, something that depends on a battery. Well, imagine that the battery indicator on your smartphone was broken, and it may be telling you that you have full battery, but in half an hour that suddenly gets cut to half. That's what our chronic fatigue is like. It doesn't matter how much you've put the phone to charge, you just simply don't know if you're gonna wake up with full battery and it's actually gonna be full, or if it's gonna be 5% and that's it, or if it's gonna be telling you it's half, but in reality it's 25. That's what our chronic fatigue is like. And it can be very sudden. Like you may have been perfectly fine doing the dishes, 5 minutes ago, and suddenly you stop and you just feel like you've run a marathon. That's what that chronic fatigue is like. It's so unpredictable, it's so sudden, it's really violent as well. It's what makes it actually so hard to manage. It's not like when you go to the gym and you expect you're gonna be tired afterwards. It can literally just hit you out of the blue. And that's the reason why preventive measures are so important. Because, for example, being a tour guide, I can be in 3 different places in one day. It can be quite draining. So I actually need to force myself to stop. Even though I may be feeling well, I need to actually like put time aside and say, between this hour and this hour, I'm not moving, I'm not doing anything, or I am disconnecting from the world, or things like that. Having to schedule rest, even though you may be feeling fine, can be a really hard thing to have to accept. But I know if I don't schedule that rest, the batteries may deplete even faster than I may expect. So that's what living with chronic fatigue does to you. And yes, I mean, if you've had COVID twice, though, and I can suspect it's probably a lot worse, because there has been some very serious side effects with that long COVID. But because long COVID have affected a lot of people and it became very visible for a while, that's actually given chronic illnesses such as fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome a chance to become visible again. Now, I'll give you a few other examples of secondary side effects that can vary on people with fibromyalgia, but that can be quite hard to manage as well. People with fibromyalgia, most of the time we have really cold hands and really cold feet. That's because, again, our brain messages are not working properly. And I know this probably sounds silly, but the clothes that we wear have an impact on that and have an impact on how we perceive that type of temperature. So synthetic clothings are really bad for people with fibromyalgia and other type of chronic illnesses. Because they normally produce excess sweat, and if you have excess sweat in your skin, it's clogging the information that you're receiving through your skin. It's not making you aware of how cold or warm you may be, etc., etc. But in general, they also create different skin sensations. And, remember that out of all of our body senses, skin is the one that is most exposed to everything. That's the reason why people with fibromyalgia tend to have quite sensitive skin, quite dry skin as well. So all of my t-shirts tend to be cotton, just because it's, nice and not harsh on the skin. Hi Jen, hi This, how are you doing? Welcome to our talk on fibromyalgia, or general just natural fabrics like wool and things like that. But again, the area where the seam may be scratching me on my skin, it may feel like torture to me, where to someone else it may be okay. So having the right type of clothes, having something that feels comfortable, having the right type of bed sheets, socks, shoes is super important for someone with fibromyalgia or chronic illness in general, because those little things will nag at us during our day-to-day, and they may become so irritating that they may actually throw us off. And that type of overwhelming sensation is also a very common symptom of fibromyalgia. Hey Margot, how are you doing? Welcome. Now, when I mean overwhelmingness, I generally mean not like anxiety, but when you just kind of feel like there is just too much around you, or something is just abrasive. That's the type of overwhelmingness that the vast majority of us people with fibromyalgia experience. There's too much stuff that you just can't again, your brain is on overload. You can't process that. It's very similar to what some people with autism or ADHD go through when they are in places where there is just too much stimuli. They just can't cope with it. It can be the same for us, whether it's too much skin overstimulation, whether it's other types of sensory stimulation. For example, I am very, very sensitive to certain vibrations, whether it's very, very low humming vibrations, like I can actually feel them through my body. I can't explain it any other way. I genuinely feel them. They genuinely make me feel sick. It's not nice. It's the same with certain types of noises. My parents always said that since I was very young, it was like if I was a bat, I could hear like frequencies and be sensitive to certain things that, other kids maybe weren't. And it was because of the fibromyalgia, because you will perceive sound and you will perceive some frequencies in a way that is altered because of the brain malfunction. So it's literally all of those types of things. Smells as well. There are certain smells that will really trigger me and will make me feel really, really unwell. Like perfume shops are honestly one of my worst nightmares, because you just, when they come to you with like 3,000 testers, like try this lovely fragrance. And I just simply don't know if that fragrance is going to work okay with me or not. The reason why things like that happen is because of the chemicals. And again, chemicals have an impact in our neurology. So that's why they can trigger us. It's the same reason why certain foods don't agree with us, because of the chemical reaction they throw on our bodies may not be something our brain can cope with. So that someone with fibromyalgia can become overwhelmed by so many different reasons very quickly, and we may have meltdowns, like proper like 5-year-old meltdown of, oh my god, I dropped my ice cream on the floor, mom, and I don't know what to do with my life, because it generally feels like your brain has just melted and you just don't know what's happening. It genuinely makes it very frustrating, particularly if you're a grown adult and the day before you were just operating normally and today is just not your day. Don't. So much has become clear. I've often felt like I'm only one going. No, you're definitely not. You're definitely not, Dawn. This is honestly something that happens to a lot of people. And the going crazy thing is something that I also wanted to mention. Hey, Melissa. Hi, Alan. Welcome to our talk of fibromyalgia. Because of this overwhelmingness and the fact that it's so hard for us to explain what's happening, we may feel like we're going crazy. There is a lot of medical gaslighting that happens. A lot of doctors have traditionally said that this type of chronic illness is actually in our brain, that we're making it up. That's not true. I mean, it's in our brain in the sense of our brain is malfunctioning, but we are not making it up. It's just, happening. We were just born with the wrong cables, with the wrong chips. It's nothing we can do about it, unfortunately. Hey, Robert, how are you? But it generally can make you feel like you're going crazy, because if you're particularly in a group of people, and that's the reason why social situations can become really hard. If you're in a group of people and you're the only one that, like in our case, smelled that flower and that made you feel revolting and no one else feels that way, it makes you feel alienated. It makes you feel like there's something wrong with you, particularly if those other people are not sympathetic or are not aware of what you're going through. It genuinely makes you feel like there is no space for you in the world. And considering that our illness can be quite isolating as well, because when you're in a lot of pain and when you're very fatigued, you generally don't want to do a lot of stuff, or can do a lot of stuff because it can be quite restrictive. You become very isolated. There is a lot of people with fibromyalgia that can barely leave the house. And even if you can leave the house, if people have not actually understood what you're going through, or they may have reactions that are not very welcoming to the way your illness, which is actually very temperamental and strange to manage, can behave like, you may not want to put yourself in that situation. You may not want to engage, and as a way of protecting yourself, you isolate yourself. But the isolation is really bad. That can play on our mental health as well, and it can play into our general illness, because at the end of the day, human emotions and human relations are, they are messages as well. It's, they have powerful effects on our body. So depriving ourselves from that human contact can genuinely cause severe problems for us. There's nothing worse in this world than feeling lonely or wanting to talk to somebody but not being able to. And it's generally, it just has so many dimensions. It's an illness that has so many dimensions. Hey, Kimberly, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for having a listen to our talk of fibromyalgia. So, I always say it is a chronic illness, and it's all about, your health, your well-being, and making sure that you understand how your brain affects the rest of your body. But it does spill into other aspects of life. It genuinely does. A lot of chronic illnesses do. Because, I can only think of, Chris and James, who have shared already their experiences of having someone in their lives that may be going through this. It is very hard. It is very hard living with someone that may be going through this, mostly because a lot of the time you are completely powerless to help them out. Or you may feel powerless because you can't even see what they're going through. You can't feel what they're feeling. And it's really infuriating because, if someone is broken their leg, you know what's wrong with them. Like, their leg is broken, they need rest. You don't put pressure on their leg. You don't force them to go for a walk. You see what I mean? There is a clear process, a clear guideline of what you can do. It's not like that with chronic illnesses like this. It can be really hard. And there is not actually a lot of support for people who are caring or supporting people like this, like what Chris was talking about, charities providing support for men to just talk about the illness. It's even harder as well, I think, in some ways, for men who are supporting people who may have these chronic illnesses, because that sense of inability to help another person can be just as damaging for mental health. James, thank you so much. You honestly didn't have to. This is generally just something I do to help people, but thank you so much. You're very kind. Don, unfortunately, I'm one of those people who find it hard to live. Yeah, Don, I completely get that, because after you've get knocked down a few times from that social situation, you just don't want to expose yourself to it again. It's just basic defense mechanism. It's basic common sense, and it takes a really long time to break down those barriers again. It generally does. One of the few silver linings of COVID is that there's a lot of new research. Yeah, that's 100% is one of the few things that I'm happy for. I'm not happy, of course, that a lot of people have ended up in this situation, but it's one of the good things that I think, when situations like this become more aware to more people, it tends to be generally better for everybody, because, well, the more aware you guys are, the more aware I am, the more the words goes around, the easier it is for us to step into other people's shoes and to understand that this is a genuine struggle, that actually takes a lot of us to just deal with. So anyway, that's really what I wanted to say today. So thank you so much for listening. Really, really appreciate you guys being here with me. Like I said, I genuinely do this just to hopefully help some other people, whether it's finding understanding here and realizing that you're not alone, because you most definitely aren't, or whether it's, people going through something similar and seeing how it can affect you, or gaining more insight, or whether you just don't have any relationship to any of this at all, but it just helps you. It just helps you becoming more aware of what other people in life go through. Any time that we gain further insight of what other people's struggle is, particularly if it's people outside of our cycle, we become better for it as a society, I think. Oh, Chris, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate this. And no, honestly, Bo and Ronnie, thank you guys for being here, because, it's being able to have these conversations that is the only thing that's actually going to help people move forward. I know I'm very vocal about it, but I know not everybody is vocal about it, because it's hard to talk about this stuff as well. So, Dawn, thank you so much for sharing your experience, and Polly and everyone else, because I know it's not easy to actually just come here, whether it's on chat on the camera, and say, hey, I got to deal with this half of my time, and it's not pleasant. A lot of us actually grow a lot of resent to the way our illness makes us behave and the way it makes us live, and that resent transforms into resent towards ourselves. So it's hard talking about this from that perspective, but vocalizing those issues, vocalizing those struggles is very important. To kind of give ourselves a little bit of credit, but also to let everyone else deal with that. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jenny. You're very kind. Thank you so much. I'm glad this has helped you guys understand better. Chris, thank you. Yes, of course. Honestly, Chris, my contact details are on my channel. Sorry, my brain is starting to slow down. Around my channel, I think they're also on the feed. You can always find my email. You're always very welcome, if you can find it, to contact heygo and ask for my email directly. I don't have a problem with that. And if you are on the Voyagers group chat, my name there is Areala CG. So I am about. So very, very happy for you to contact me. It's genuinely not an issue. I'm always just happy to hear from people. Jen, your daughter also has fibro. Well, again, Jen, my door is always open. So if there is anything I can do, always happy to talk about it. Because like I said, I've experimented on me for all of these years. I'm not suggesting everything I've experimented on may be useful for everyone, but if at least it's something you can give it a go and it helps, then hey, that's worthwhile. And on that note, I can feel my brain actually plummeting, and I have a very, very long day ahead of me, guys. So I'm gonna call it a day there. Thank you so much for being here again. Honestly, I genuinely just appreciate being able to talk about this stuff. I genuinely live for this. And thank you so much for actually having the kindness in your heart to let these illnesses and let these feelings into your life and being more empathetic about them. We definitely need more people like you in the world. So honestly, on behalf of me and everyone else that goes through this stuff, thank you. We genuinely appreciate it. Thank you so much, guys. I hope you take care of yourself. Well, Chris, I hope that you have a proper tour here on heygo. This is actually, like I said, very random. It's not representative of heygo in the majority of stuff. But honestly, I think it's a really good platform for a lot of different initiatives. So give it a go. There is some very good people in here, as you can see. Everyone here in chat is just amazing. So thank you so much, guys. Have a lovely day. I will hopefully see you around sometime soon. And if I don't see you around sometime soon, honestly, my thoughts are with you, and take care. All right, see you later. Bye bye.